Ladies and gentlemen, Palantir Technologies has a key reversal at that $17 level of support, and we see an increase about 4% in terms of the trading session, basically closing at the 18s. And we're going to be talking about why this is very important for Palantir. And in terms of options volatility, we have a lot of investors that are taking a bullish bet on Palantir achieving either 18, 19, and even possibly touching that $20 level of resistance here in the next week. But not just talking about next week, and with basically December that will be wrapping up and will probably fly by us quicker than we can think. What will Palantir spell in 2024? What's the trading going to be like, and what can we expect from this AI stock that has a lot of speculation in nature, but also is a leading competitor in the AI industry? And in terms of that, before we get into the details, hit that like button, subscribe for daily videos. Of course, I'm not a financial advisor. I am just collecting the data and dispatching it to you guys. What we see with Palantir Technologies is closing here at 1777. Like I said, with this critical level of support that we had a reversal. The reason why is because after Q3 earnings report, we had this large gap that really accelerated Palantir from 14s right here up to the 17s. Now, talking about that, Palantir has established a little bit of support here at the 18s. It'll be great to basically reassume that support and be able to try to get this buying pressure back up here, momentum back to the $20 level of resistance. And remember, Palantir recently was actually able to break that resistance when it accomplished its recent 52-week year-to-date high here at 21.85 back on November 20th. Now, if we look at the options volatility in terms of the actual call volume, we have lots of call volume and buying confidence coming in here in terms of contracts at the $18 and the $19 strike price versus the puts that we have right here, 21,000 on the 18, and you got 12,000 on the 19. So a lot of buyers and investors are basically taking a bet that Palantir will basically assume and accumulate in its actual valuation. Now, current market cap for Palantir is at 38.67 billion, and in terms of the volume, we had about 57 billion that came in, which is kind of slightly around its average. What's more important is to really evaluate for Palantir why this slide did happen. Remember, we had that bearish media articles that were continuing to be published day after day after day after day regarding that Army contract. We'll touch base with that, but also we had something that might have slid over a lot of investors' heads. Now, with that and talking, remember, Palantir actually fell 15% since December 1st right here. People saying, is this a buy the dip situation and we're going to reapproach those 20s, or will Palantir continue to fall as one of its biggest criticisms is its high valuation and also its decelerated revenue growth rate. Now, in terms of the actual S&P 500, that's a big kind of overhanging question that we've had at Palantir, and that is because we know that it's achieved its fourth quarter of GAAP profitability, which fits the criteria for the inclusion of Palantir to become in the S&P 500. If PLTR were to be included in the S&P 500, this could possibly be bullish in many ways, as it does bring maturity to a company, which does reduce volatility. But however, think of all the other ETFs and index funds that do track the S&P 500. So you're going to have a lot of buying pressure and buying volume naturally coming from many different types of investors that are looking more into index funds. Now, why I think this kind of brushed over our head is because S&P recently made its quarterly announcement on the additions and the removals from the various indexes. And among the companies announced here on December 1st to be included in the S&P 500 was Uber. Notably absent from the list was Palantir. So bulls really speculated, and we're probably wondering, we know the S&P 500 inclusion is hopefully on the horizon, but why did it not happen? Because we do have this here from the CFO saying that they're basically remain committed to driving profitable growth, and they refer the inspection of the GAAP profitability in each quarter, which would make them eligible for the inclusion in the S&P 500. So the CFO looks like he wants to be included, have Palantir be included in the S&P 500. Now, talking about that, one thing that could be in the actual question for why it possibly wasn't was because the S&P 500 particularly likes to look at single class stocks, and Palantir Technologies is a dual class stock. That was a rule that was eventually dropped, but however, could that be their presumption going forward? This, of course, here it is again, the contract that's in question, and this is that U.S. Army data analytics contract that we saw over the week being published on a daily basis in terms of a bearish news, basically saying, hey, they think that likely here there's going to be a reduction in this Army contract that's currently worth about $458 million that could be modified to $106 million over 2 years due to other vendors coming in. And why you had had uncertainty and fear coming in there is because, oh my gosh, there's competition, blah, blah, blah. One thing that we do see is Palantir does have a lot of revenue that is generated from these government contracts. However, what's important and what we have seen for Palantir is its inflection point that it has reached with a solid growth driver of the AIP bootcamp, their artificial intelligence platform. And with that bootcamp, this is a way to get more commercial customers to the table and also increase their commercial revenue growth. And as this develops and becomes more commercialized, you'll have Palantir that is not solely relying on these governmental contracts that can end them at any time. And another thing that people are more skeptical about is their rising accounts receivables. And what they're measuring here, and what analysts are measuring, are these things called days DSO, days sales outstanding. And this is basically a company's way of efficiency in collecting cash. And a rising DSO can mean that a number of things, but is generally thought to be not good, because this represents the cash from customers that are booked as revenue, but actually has not been received yet by Palantir. There's a gap in that. You got cash coming in as revenue, but Palantir, the company, actually hasn't received that cash yet. So as that expansion or those days of sales outstandings continues to increase, this is considered a gap. With that being said, you have had this DSO that has increased from 49 all the way to a high recently at 66. So in terms of that, these are some of the bearish things that you are seeing that we could see why we saw that 15% slip. However, we do have big investors like Cathie Wood that are coming in and even buying the dip right here. And as we talked about in the last video, that ARK Invest now owns over 9.89 million shares of Palantir. And what's important about ARK Invest is that this is an ETF that basically works on investing in companies that have disruptive technology. So Cathie Wood here taking a bet on the artificial intelligence industry by putting a lot of faith in the AI industry. And as we saw this during the third quarter, Wood had increased her stake in Palantir by 38%, picking up 2.58 million shares. So as we talk about that, and is Palantir a stock to watch? I would say most definitely, with its solid growth drivers and what we have had with forecast of revenue growth, and in terms of the compounded annual growth revenue, we have the forecast for 2023 that will reach 2.2 billion, and this is around a 16% growth from the 1.9 billion in revenue. One thing for Palantir is that it for sure has a great financial in terms of its actual cash balances. There's a lot of cash here, literally no debt, and they're investing a lot into their commercial customers and trying to, I think, get to try to diversify its clientele basis. With that being said, I think Palantir, great stock for 2024. We'll be keeping an eye on it. And of course, hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. We'll keep an eye on the trading session coming up here in the next week for Palantir. Peace out.